Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the When Words Collide podcast. I am your host, Lucas Diano. My pronouns are he, him. My co-host, Eli, isn't with us today, but you know who is? The one and only Cait Gordon. Hello.
Hi there, and thank you so much for saying cat.
Yes, I am very happy to have you here with me today. I am super excited to be here at When Words Collide. It's a very wonderful event.
Yes.
Lots of amazing people, lots of amazing events. And I was hoping we could just talk about some of that. So if you don't mind me jumping into questions here.
I love answering questions. Let's do it.
I love asking them. All right. So being a little bit loosey-goosey here.
I like it.
When it comes to writing, there's obviously a learning curve when it comes to kind of getting into it. Anyone who knows your work knows that you have tackled a very broad pool of subjects. And what do you think is one thing that you've really learned about yourself as you've been a writer?
The biggest thing I've learned is to tune out the haters and the absolutists. Like, what I mean is the people who try to almost bully you into the you must write every day. You must write how many thousands of words every day. This is the only path to getting the book done. So I had to tune a lot of that out. And the other thing I had to do was believe in myself. Now, every author who's still alive has imposter syndrome. So that's always a bit of a challenge. But I made it my mission to continue to believe in myself and to choose to write the stories that I want to read. You know, I'm disabled, autistic, queer. I want stories that not only reflect me, but also the community that I live in. And I really enjoy making them fantastical. So the pew, pew, pew is always going to be there.
Can't go wrong with the pew, pew, pew.
There you go.
But yeah, really interesting to think, you know, we've gone so long hearing advice about how to do things, but it's coming from other people, and that might not work for everybody. You know, every writer is different. Everyone has a different strategy or a work ethic, and I think you're absolutely right when it comes to kind of breaking out of that mold. That's how you might succeed, or at least it'll be easiest for you to achieve what you want. And when it comes to what you write, like you said, the pew, 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 when it comes to science fiction and fantasy and those kind of genres, what draws you to it specifically?
Well, I just turned 55 yesterday, so that means that I'm episode 4, A New Hope years old when it was in theaters. So, I mean, I was like 7 or 8 back then, and I fell in love with Star Wars. I just totally did. And I think the reason why I did was, yeah, sure, it was really cool to see the special effects and such, but I loved the superimposition of the relationships. You know, the characters, they had so much personality, and to watch them interacting together to overcome, you know, all the nastiness around them. And I think that now I know that's kind of space opera, right? The space opera subgenre of science fiction. So I'm that years old, but I pretended I was sick on Sundays for church so I could watch reruns of Star Trek years old. So, you know, like the thing I loved about Star Wars and Star Trek, and yes, you can love both at the same time.
Yes, you can.
There's no rule. Is I felt that there was always an element of hope. And I think that's a very big part of my character is as a human being, is writing stories that live for hope amongst adversity. So I was drawn in that way. I'm not as much of a fantasy writer, but I kind of would like to be too. So stay tuned. Maybe one day there'll be an autistic heroine with her emotional support dragon.
I mean, I'd read that. That sounds great. And, you know, like what you said with Star Wars, for me, it was Doctor Who at a young age. Yeah, just being kind of entranced by these worlds. And I think you're right with hope, you know, because when you think about science fiction, we had gone so long with the idea of evil aliens and end-of-the-world situations from like the 1950s and 60s and so on. But I think using that genre as kind of a vessel for more hopeful storytelling is, I think, definitely a fascinating way to do it because, you know, optimism wins in the end.
I agree. The other thing, too, when you bring up Doctor Who, one thing I absolutely love in the world building of Doctor Who, it has a wonderful humor element to it, but it even has kind of a cheekiness in the world building.
Yeah.
Like, we are perfectly content with accepting wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey as an explanation for time travel. Like,
Yeah.
we're not going to argue with that.
Absolutely.
Okay, that's what the doctor said. We're going for that.
Yeah, we're going for that. Go in the TARDIS and fly away. You're right, because when it comes to the world building, it doesn't need to be strictly realistic. I think trying to make science fiction like bounding it to real world standards, I think you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot, because there's endless possibilities there. That's one of the reasons I love Doctor Who, is because of just how far it takes itself to tell a story. It doesn't restrict itself at all. And same with Star Wars to an extent as well, like just the lengths it can go.
Yeah.
It's just great. Science fiction's probably my favorite genre, I think, just in any medium, really. And
I love it too. And the more imaginative, the better.
Absolutely.
Like,
Couldn't
I'm
agree more.
perfectly willing to suspend my disbelief. Just tell me a story, entertain me. Like, I'm cool. I'm not going to analyze it to death for technological accuracy. Take me for the ride. It's your story. I'm going to believe your world.
Yeah, give me your magic, your bubble wrap aliens, your time travel. Regardless, I'm here for it. I'll eat it all up. And when it comes to getting into writing, like you said, we've been asking everyone we've been interviewing this one question.
Okay.
What is one piece of advice you would give to an aspiring writer trying to really break into it?
That's such a good question. And I guess I want to know that they want advice from me, first of all.
I mean, who wouldn't? I mean, you're wonderful.
Well, thank you. Breaking into it, I was published for the first time at age 47. I wanted to be published at age 24. And I think I know why I got in my own way. I kept thinking, I have to write a book. I have to write a book. And at age 45, I thought, oh, you know what? I'm just going to entertain myself with a creative writing exercise. I became more interested in writing the story. That's what I cared about. And I thought, I'm writing this for me. It's just going to be a thing that I do. And it was interesting. And that was the time where I became very intensely disabled with chronic pain. So I had a lot of fear. And I made up a character who's disabled with chronic pain. And she almost became my guide to say, you're going to be okay. Look what I'm doing. You're going to be fine. So I wrote this story to make myself feel good, take my mind off my pain. And then when I was done, once I told myself the story, I thought, this isn't such a bad little story. I wonder if anybody else would be interested in it. So instead of starting off with, I have to write a book, and I have to make sure it sells, and I have to think of who I'm going to sell it to, I put all that aside and just enjoyed the journey of writing the story. And then I got to the finish line, and then I found a publisher. Now, can I tell you how I found the publisher?
Please do.
Because we were just talking about Doctor Who.
Yes.
So I was someone who never really went to like pop cons or comic cons. And I had friends who said, we really want you to come with us. We really want you to cosplay with us. And I was like, oh, that's not really my thing. But then I found out that cosplay really is just crafting with costumes. And I said, okay, I'm in. And they loved Doctor Who. And I said, well, I'm not going unless I could be a fashionista Dalek. And they went, okay. So here I was like, how the heck am I going to be a fashionista Dalek? I found a red dress. I found a red construction helmet.
Oh, yeah, I see where this is going.
Right? I took some old pill bottles and put them on top of the helmet. I had a plunger. I painted it silver. I had long black gloves. And in my red dress, I spray painted styrofoam hemispheres. It was a blast.
That sounds amazing.
It was a blast. And I got lost at the con. I couldn't find my friends.
Oh, no.
And then I hear, hey, I really like your costume. And it was Nathan Frechette from Press Renaissance Press, who loves Doctor Who, loves cosplay. And I went over to their table. I accidentally pitched my book. And they said, send us your book in 6 months. Ooh. And I did, and it got accepted. So always remember, write the story you want to write. And if you can dress like a fashionista Dalek, do it.
That's amazing. I don't know if you have any photos of that, but that sounds incredible.
I do.
I mean, that's an amazing coincidence.
I know.
But I guess that's kind of an encapsulation of the power of fandom and nerd culture, I guess, because, we all come together to talk about the things we love, and even if it's something goofy or whatever it may be, we always find each other in the end.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of us geeks in publishing. Mm-hmm. So, never be afraid to let your geek out.
Absolutely. I think anyone who tries to suppress it, they're limiting themselves, really, their creative potential, I think. Like, let it fly freely.
Yeah.
And I'm also personally jealous of your Dalek crafting capabilities. I've wanted to be a Dalek forever. Actually, on a similar note, I know you've done a lot of writing for short form. stories.
Yes.
And you've touched on what you think the importance or the value of short stories can be. What do you think are some aspects of short stories that kind of give them power compared to longer form or just books? What do you think about short stories?
It's funny. I'm going to just put on my disability hat for advocacy hat for a
Please
second.
do.
What's wonderful about short fiction, even flash fiction, that's super short fiction, and I even heard of microfiction, I did something with that, is that if you don't have the energy to put into, a long form, you could say to yourself, okay, I think I can do 1,000 words. I feel like I have the energy to do that. You could accomplish something in a shorter amount of time and then go, hey, I did that, right? So from an accessibility point of view, I actually love when there's calls for microfiction, like 200 words, or flash fiction or short fiction. I think it's more accessible for a larger group of people. Mm-hmm. But in terms of like story writing, I love the challenge of short form. I have a short work published in Stargazer's Tales from the Microcosm that AI science fiction put out a few years ago. And it was 250 words, I think, was the limit. And I thought, how am I going to write a story? But you know what I did? And so it's really fun to challenge the brain. How do you grab somebody's attention with so few words? I think it's a wonderful writing exercise, a wonderful challenge that way. I also love short form as a reader. During the pandemic, just the stress of the pandemic, I had concentration problems. And so I was just living for people who write short fiction because then I could feel a sense of accomplishment reading their things. If I knew I couldn't dedicate myself to a novel, but I can read a 3,000 word short story. And so I still get to participate. I love short stories so much, I became an anthology editor.
Ah, yes. Yeah. You did a couple anthology books, didn't you? Yeah.
I did. Again, I have this autistic tendency to blurt things out. So again, with Nathan Frischette, I blurted out, gee, I'd love to read an anthology or put an anthology together that only disabled people are the authors and they're writing characters that reflect their lived experiences. Mm-hmm. I don't know how to do that. And then Nathan goes, well, Renaissance will do it. And I said, okay, but I don't know how to do that. Oh, that's okay. Why don't you ask Talia to help you? And Talia C. Johnson is my best friend. Mm-hmm. So we had two people who knew nothing about editing anthologies. What could possibly go wrong? But, we had a blast doing Nothing Without Us and Nothing Without Us 2. What was fascinating to me about doing a call for subs for disability fiction were the people who were replying to us were saying, thank you so much for doing this. Even if I don't get into your anthology, I'm going to buy your book. Mm-hmm. There's a hunger for protagonists, who are disabled, deaf, blind, neurodivergent, and or who manage mental illness. It was kind of cool to be on the other side of the table. So instead of being an author submitting, being the editor who determines destiny, yikes. Now I just understand editors everywhere, it feels like. It's like they don't mean to, they're not telling you you're bad. It's just that sometimes an anthology has a feel to it and your story is good, but it just doesn't work with what we're doing. And oh, please. It broke my heart sometimes to say no to people. Mm-hmm. So now I don't feel so bad when I have a story that isn't accepted.
I think what you're doing is great. I think more people should, have that mindset, that openness, and I think anthology stories are a perfect medium to bring in people from every corner of society, along stuff that might share a genre, but like tone-wise or structure-wise, totally different. I know one of my favorite shows is Twilight Zone.
Oh yes.
Yeah, that kind of thing always hooks you right in. Anthology's great. And actually, segueing from that, you actually have a panel here at When Words Collide about writing disabled protagonists.
Yes.
So I was hoping to ask you, what you think the importance of representing people with disabilities in fiction, especially genres like science fiction. What you think the importance is there.
Well, considering I'm the author of a disability hope punk series, Iris and the Crew Tear Through Space, I guess I feel it's pretty important to have, even having world building that is based around disabled, deaf, blind, neurodivergent characters. First of all, I want to thank When Words Collide for having us do this panel. It was a suggestion that I'd made based on a tagline that we had for Nothing Without Us, which is, we are the heroes, not the sidekicks. And I say this so often, but I do believe in the power of fiction to influence. And I'm hoping when readers, and like all readers who engage in fiction that stars disabled heroes, that they might look around at disabled people here on Earth and regard us differently. So instead of characters to be pitied or to be afraid to be in our shoes, whatnot, they will say, hey, no, disabled folks, they're awesome, and they do a lot with their lives, and we should make this world more accessible for them. I really do believe in the power of fiction to influence that. So what I'm hoping tomorrow, since the panel is staffed with panelists with this lived experience, that I'm hoping that whoever is attending will say, okay, let's, we have disabled people in our world here. Let's have them be not some tokenized character in the background, but let's have them be part of the adventures too.
That's great. I'm very excited for that panel. Definitely going to swing by. Yeah, I just think that's great. To live in a time where everyone everywhere can be represented in the fiction that they love, which definitely hasn't been the case all the time.
No.
Of course. Yeah, I just think fiction, it's fiction. There's no hindrances from the real world. So what's stopping anybody and everybody from being represented and accepted in those worlds? And that's why I think writing about different people with different experiences is so important, because then you can see yourself represented in that way. And speaking of representation, I had asked about advice before.
Yeah.
On your panel, you're going to be talking about writing about disabled protagonists.
Yes.
However, obviously, in previous times, people writing characters with disabilities did not share those experiences or completely relate or even understand them properly.
Yes.
And so when it comes to writing about characters who have a certain worldview that you might not share, would you have any advice for writing about something that is unknown in that way to you? Yeah,
that's an excellent question. I get asked a lot, I'm not disabled. Am I allowed to write disabled characters, right? And I actually find that a very respectful question. And I say, yeah, sure. But make sure that you have done research into these lived experiences, and make sure that you find people to vet your writing, to basically, and you can even talk to folks, like say in my case, like I'm a disabled person, I have a lot of disability representation in Iris and the Crew Tear Through Space. I don't have all of those lived experiences. So I, for example, had to find a sensitivity editor who has 2 above-knee leg prostheses for my awesome security guard, chief of security, and I had to find a blind sensitivity editor for Iris, and I had to find a deaf sensitivity editor for my captain, and anytime I did deaf representation. I do a lot of research, and the research that I do is lived experience research. So I won't, like if I want to read something about being a deaf pilot, well, I found out there's a deaf pilot blog. Like a blog written by a pilot who's deaf. Like, oh, I'm gonna read you. Or different blogs or vlogs from folks with the representation that I would like to put in. And I always like the cherry on top to be those sensitivity editors. Other thing that I do, which I highly recommend if it's not your lived experience, is just write enough for readers to find themselves in the story. Don't go maybe into too much of an own voice deep dive, because that's where you can potentially come up with some trouble there. It's tricky, but when in doubt, find humans who have those lived experiences. And if you can find like more than one of a certain lived experience, because for example, there's different ways that blind people navigate. Some use a cane, some use a guide dog, and some use different methods. So again, when I wrote Iris and the Crew, I wasn't trying to say, no, this is the way you are when you're this kind of person. No, I wanted to write a space opera, defying ableist pirates, lots of pew, pew, pew. Of course, if it's an authentic Cait Gordon novel, it's got cake in it. So I just wanted to write a humorous story.
Yeah.
Definitely, if you want to include disabled characters, do it, but please just don't do it from your perception of what these characters are. Go and find humans.
We had touched on Star Wars a little bit before.
Yeah.
Luke Skywalker is a character who, is technically disabled. He's missing a hand.
Yeah.
However, after he loses his hand, the story never really focuses on that ever again. He gets his robotic replacement. We're just meant to accept that.
Yeah.
I hope this isn't too much of a loaded question. If you were writing Luke Skywalker in that scenario, would you have put more focus on him learning to cope and live with his new way of life, missing a hand?
I personally would not. I like the fact that he's got he has his prosthetic hand and he's still going to do what he's doing. Again, this is my opinion. I wouldn't feel that maybe I could write that. I don't think maybe I'm qualified to write that. Maybe if I didn't have, maybe if I had a hand prosthetic, maybe I would put something in there. Just from the outside, I kind of love that he's just living his best life, using the Force.
Yeah, swinging lightsabers. Yeah.
I mean, I love Star Wars Rebels so hard, and I love that. Oh my gosh, I lost his name. Kanan, the Jedi.
What's
his other name? What's his other name?
No, I'm I know who you're talking about.
I want to apologize to Stephen Graham King, who loves this so much.
Kanan Jarrus, I've been informed.
That's it.
Yeah.
Kanan Jarrus goes blind.
Yeah.
Stays blind. That made me so happy.
And even in Rogue One, a Star Wars story, I also unfortunately forget his name, but he's the Force user among the ragtag group who infiltrate the Imperial base. He's blind too, and he uses the Force to fight and see his way around, lets the Force guide him. And so Star Wars has actually had a history of disabled characters or characters who are missing one of their limbs or one of their key senses, and it doesn't really dwell on it. It's a part of their character, but it's not the primary focus. Obviously, I can't speak for it because I haven't written for disabled characters, but speaking to someone who has right now, would you say it's better in some situations not to put too much focus on it, to not let a disability define a character?
Yeah, it really depends on the storytelling. Mm-hmm. So I'm autistic, and in Iris and the Crew, I don't actually have any diagnoses in the space opera. I did that on purpose. Mm-hmm. But I can tell you that my head of engineering, Herb, is autistic, and I experience auditory sensory overload as an autistic person, and I felt it actually made sense in Herb's episode to have him experience it. Because what comes out of that is, here's this accommodation so you can continue to move in the world. I guess for me, if the point I wanted to get across in Iris and the Crew is that if we had a world based where accessibility and accommodation were the norm, you might have things that get in your way with your body, but then you have your accessibility and okay, that's much better. Okay, now I'm going to go be good at stuff, Yeah. We don't have to, in my opinion, we don't have to dwell on it because, you saw me moving with my walker. You don't stop ever and ask me, so why do you have that walker? Tell me your backstory about that. We don't. You just know that I had a walker. I walked around. Now I'm sitting with you and having a podcast, living my best life.
Yeah, you have it, but it doesn't define you. It's not a major part of your personality. You are. It's not what you have to live with.
It's so tricky because I guess my autism does define me because my personality, the way I see things with nuance, the way I am explorative is all part of my neurodivergent brain. Mm-hmm. My disability, I guess, in some ways defines me because maybe of the world we live in now. But if we had a world that was fully accommodating, would I even call myself disabled? That's something I explore in Iris and the Crew. There's no need for disability pride because they're not oppressed.
They're not. Yeah. There's
it's so much fun to explore different things, right?
Yeah.
It's
honestly,
not just one way.
I think that right there is the power of fiction and everything. You just described it perfectly right there. That's a very good question actually. Now you got my brain going thinking about it. I think that's perfect, and I think everything you're doing to represent disabled people and help get more representation out there, I think is wonderful. I truly do hope we live in a day where, like you said, universal accessibility is the norm.
Yeah. Maybe
at some point there's no such thing as a disabled person because everybody is equal.
Well, yeah, that would be nice. That would be nice. Human bodies do things. So, I don't think we'll ever eradicate disability, for lack of a better phrase. But if we can eradicate inaccessibility and lack of accommodation, that would be amazing. I think a lot of times in science fiction, people might make the mistake of only writing cure narratives. But what's fun right now, if you're writing right now at this time for the readers of this time, is to write without cure narratives sometimes. Mm-hmm. I have an incurable disability. It's not going to kill me, but it means that I have to live with it for the rest of my life because there's currently no cure for it.
Yeah.
So how do I live? You know, do I stay home and feel sorry for myself, or what is Cait Gordon's story? Well, no. You know, I have lots of friends. I'm an author. I'm an editor. You know, I move in the world. I go on planes. You know, right? And so, yeah, like it's again, please let the power of fiction influence in this area.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you so much for talking with me today. It's been an absolute blast.
Thank
It's
you.
been great. No, yeah, thank you so much. If you want to see more of the amazing Cait Gordon's work, you can visit her website.
It's caitgordon.com, and my cat is Irish, so it's CaitGordon.com.
Absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much, Cait. It's been wonderful talking to you.
Thank you.
And thank you to all our listeners for tuning in. We hope you have a wonderful day wherever you are. And if you're at When Words Collide, we hope you have a good time. Thank you.